Hello again, everybody. Welcome to the Backbone Podcast, where common sense still makes sense in a world that is sick and getting sicker. And today I had just finished writing up the podcast that we're going to do right now when I saw the tragic news of the shooting, another terrible shooting, mass shooting in the Army base in Georgia. So I'm gonna do that tomorrow once we learn more information about what happened. But apparently, the psychopath who was a sergeant went nuts and started shooting up his place of work on the base. And he shot 5 people. Those people, I believe, are still alive, thankfully. And unfortunately, the vermin that did this terrible tragedy, was responsible for this terrible tragedy, is also still alive. But as you see from the banner here, we'll get to that tomorrow. As you see from the banner here, I had already started working on news that I heard last night after I finished my podcast that I did last night. And that was the rumored or most likely definite cancellation, thankfully, of Howard Stern's show on SiriusXM. Now, I've listened to Howard Stern. I used to listen to Howard Stern on a daily basis. I grew up in New York. I started listening to him in 1986. Most of you weren't born. Some of your parents were probably babies back then. He was on WNBC. If you know, you know. And he was great. He was on Afternoon Drive. He was funny. His writers were funny. He wasn't funny. But he was the champion for the everyman. He said things on the radio, and he did things on the radio that most people want to say but couldn't. And as he began his radio career in the 1980s, he made some incredible waves, and he was a poster boy for censorship. The FCC had fined NBC, and then later when he got fired from NBC, he moved on to WKRX, which is K-Rock 92.3 in New York. He had gotten fined left and right for doing, these crazy Christmas shows where people would say crazy things or do crazy things on the air, and it was considered indecent. And he became a champion for that. He became a champion for censorship. What is indecent and what isn't? What can be said on the radio and what can't? He would talk about flatulence. He would talk about bowel movements. He would talk about a lot of things in a sophomorish way, where if Phil Donahue or Oprah talked about it in a more adult way, it would be considered educational or informative. I liked Stern back in the day. He had a great team with him. The best of them all was Jackie the Joke Man Martling, who was his writer, who was actually the guy who was funny on the show. And then later on, Artie Lang, who came on in 2001. But Stern, he made the classic mistake that most men make. They always say, I always look at Rocky Marciano. And Rocky Marciano is the only heavyweight champion to retire undefeated. And he did have a chance to come out of retirement and fight Floyd Patterson a couple of years later. And he had a big payday coming to him. Big payday for those guys back then. But he said no. He said, my time is over. I'm stepping out. He chose legacy over greed. And that's what happens with a lot of guys. They stick around way too long. And they stick around for only one reason: greed, or they just don't know how to quit. And there's a time when you're over. And for Stern, he's been over for about, I would say, 15 years. He wasn't entertaining at all for the past 10, 12 years. I mean, I haven't listened to Stern in such a long time. I watched snippets of him recently, especially during the presidential campaign when he had Biden on last year, I think, and then he had Kamala Harris. And I tell you, I didn't even recognize him. He sounded like the vapid, disconnected celebrity that he used to mock. He was once the average guy on the radio who used to bitch and moan about his wife not giving him enough sex and his kids driving him crazy and his neighbors being assholes and his staff being, not listening to him. And it was fun. It was edgy. But then he became exactly what he once hated. He became that vapid, condescending celebrity that didn't relate to the people that he was speaking to on the radio. And he didn't have the cool guests on anymore. He used to have comedians on who were just breaking in, or rock bands that were just starting out, like Bon Jovi, and they were just starting out. They got onto the radio, and he had great comedians like Dice Clay and Sam Kinison and Judy Tenuta and Pat Cooper. Like, he had these people that were just funny, and they would put on like these Gilbert Gottfried, of course, and they'd put on these great performances. I don't even know if they were performances. I think they were just being real. It was the only place you could be real, and they were just funny. And then he had these great cast of characters that were listeners called the Whack Pack. He had the KKK guy who was just, if you look up anything on YouTube, especially the Howie Weird squares with the KKK guy, he steals the show all the time. And he had Beetlejuice, and he had Hank the Angry Dwarf, and Elephant Boy, and Kenneth Keith Kallenbach. It was just, the list went on and on. But at some point, he changed. And Artie Lang, who used to be his writer from 2001 to 2009, listen, Artie has his demons. Satan got his claws into him good for a long time. And we pray that he's doing better now. But Artie said in an interview a few years ago that Stern was very concerned about being a 60-year-old guy having porn stars and strippers on his show showing their boobs all the time. He didn't want to do that anymore. He was worried that he would look creepy doing this. But the problem with Stern's show, with his shtick, was that's what people listened to him for. That's why you tuned in. You didn't tune in to hear Howard Stern do an interview with, some celebrity and talk to them about their movie and then leave. We want to hear about their sex lives. He wanted to hear, what kind of underwears, Gwyneth Paltrow wore. We didn't care about, her acting lessons and who's her mentor and all that other bullshit. Now, Stern had Jackie the Joke Man Markling on, who was a very risque comedian, to say the least. Very blue, as they say in the business. And he was his writer for a long time, and he wrote these crazy bits. And Stern flew with it, and the show just was so controversial and pissed so many people off. But it got mostly New Yorkers. It was a New York show that syndicated all over the country in the mid-90s. But it was a New York show with a New York attitude, with a high school boys attitude, a locker room attitude. And it worked. It worked. Now, Stern wasn't the funny machine. He wasn't the funny engine in the show. Like I said, it was Jackie, and then later on it was Artie. And when Jackie, the Joke Man, left in 2000-ish, the show's ratings took a dip. And Stern had to make a big move, and he made a move to hire Artie Lang, who I just loved as a comedian. I saw him at the casino that I worked in a bunch of times. And he brought in, not only that, he brought in a different type of attitude. Artie brought in the street guy attitude, the bookie attitude. He had great stories about bookies and gambling and prostitutes and comedy and drugs, and that's what made the show great. It wasn't Stern talking about his celebrity girlfriend or his weekends in the Hamptons, because that's not interesting. Nobody gives a shit about that. Nobody can relate to that. It was the everyday street stuff that made the Stern show great. And as of recently, over the last 10 years, over the last 5 years, really, since 2016, since Trump, when Trump first became president, Stern went woke. And as we all know, when you go woke, everything goes broke. And his show just went completely downhill. He went from having millions of listeners across the country to, according to NBC's website, he is down to 125,000. That is pathetic. And so SiriusXM, who gave him a $500 million contract about 5 years ago, which is absurd, they are now thinking, well, they're not thinking, they are doing, they are putting into place canceling this show. Now, they're not going to cancel this show outright. And let me explain how. The rumor is that they're going to make Stern an offer that he is going to refuse. They're not going to pay him anywhere near the money that they paid him already in the past, and he is going to most likely refuse it, and they'll be able to say, "Okay, we tried." So it makes Stern look like the guy who quit, not the show being canceled. And his move to Sirius Satellite Radio in 2006 was a risk, but it kind of worked in the beginning. And over the years, Stern amassed an audience, a very loyal fan base. He was inducted into the Radio Hall of Fame in 2012, and then he became, this very wealthy guy. He was on the Forbes list of highest paid entertainers in 2022. Stern was considering quitting. Now, in 2010, I remember listening to this. Stern told one of his show writers, Stern said on the show, that he had a difficult announcement to make and he had plans to retire. And a lot of people didn't believe this. A lot of people did believe this. He gained a lot of attention online, and it turned out to be just a prank. Stern continued the radio show, as we all know, and surpassed a 5-year contract that he did extend in 2010 and then some. Most recently in 2020, he signed, as we said, the $500 million contract during those COVID years. And he refused to come into the studio to do the show because he was afraid of contracting COVID-19, which took a major hit on his manhood, because people are like, "What are you, a pussy? What are you, afraid to go out?" I mean, he's huddled up in his apartment with all his fucking cats. He's got like 30 cats. He's like an old woman from the Upper West Side with bad hair. Now, where did this all come from? Well, on August 5th, several outlets reported that the Stern Show was getting canceled. as his latest contract comes to an end. Stern has not confirmed himself if the show is coming to an end. I believe he's on vacation. However, SiriusXM has told the Hollywood Reporter that there might be some repercussions over money, and it always comes down to money. It's always going to come down to money. And Sirius has a kind of conundrum here because they could lose nearly 15% of their subscribers who identify themselves as Stern listeners if Stern is no longer on the channel. Now, what do I think is going to happen? I think what they're going to probably do is they're probably going to negotiate with Stern not to host a show anymore because the show is just not very good. What they'll probably do is they'll probably buy his library, his K-Rock days, and maybe even his NBC days. In October of 2024, XM President and Chief Content Officer Scott Greenstein told Hollywood Reporter they had not heard from Stern about wanting to leave. So Stern was okay in 2024. There was no inkling that he wanted to leave. Greenstein had said he's been with me and the company going on 2 decades, and so he's pretty happy, but he's also able, like many great artists, to stop whenever he wants. Nobody will ever replace them. He would never try to replace them. We would never try to replace them. It's not what is even appropriate, but even practical. I mean, everybody's replaceable. Everybody is replaceable. And Stern is not the same Stern that we knew from years ago. At least not the Stern that I remember. Now, what are some of the things about Stern that I didn't like? There was a interview that Stern did in May of 1999, and it was with Dana Plato. If you don't know who Dana Plato is, Dana Plato played the sister on a show on NBC called Different Strokes. Different Strokes is a show about 2 black kids who are adopted by a rich white man, and they live with him. Right? That's a pretty good show. Dana Plato was the white daughter. And like most childhood stars of that era, and even today, her life went to hell after the show was over. And she turned to alcohol and drugs. She went on Stern's show to try to reinvent herself. And callers and the show staff and the staff of the show ambushed her to no end. And they made her feel like shit. And it was very uncomfortable to listen to. The next day, Dana Plato's body was found as she overdosed. Now, of course, Stern said, hey, listen, this wasn't my fault. I just had her on the show. We tried to have a little fun with her, blah, blah, blah. But there was no remorse there. Or at least the persona was, hey, I don't give a shit. And that's what kind of rubbed me the wrong way. Now, at the time, I'm 25 years old in 1999. And I'm listening to this, and I'm saying, this guy has he has no sense of reality outside of the show. It's the only thing he has. He is simply about using up the people to come on his show and then spitting him out. That's what he did to Dana Plato. That's what he did to a few whack packers. And he has been known to do this to his staff. He's done this to Jackie Martling. He's done this certainly to Artie Lang. If you watch any interviews with Artie Lang, he refuses to talk to anybody who does not work for the show anymore. Look at a guy like Stuttering John Melendez. He won't talk to you if once you leave the show. He takes it personally, like a woman. And so that's when I started not to be I was a fan of his. I would still listen to him because he would say outrageous things, but he wasn't the champion that I thought he was. They always say don't meet your heroes. Well, I met him at a signing. He autographed a book that I bought, his first autobiography. I was there for a signing, but and he was cool to me. But that was the first time where I was like, this guy might be it may not be a persona thing. He might be a real dick deep down inside. And ironically, that's when the show's ratings really began to fall. His popularity began to wane on terrestrial radio around that time, 1999. And many people think he went to Sirius because of the incredible opportunity it was. He went to Sirius because there were rumors that K-Rock was about to can him. Now, we're going to fast forward to 2012. Artie Lang is already gone. Stern is complaining that the show is out of control and the staff is out of control. And the show was struggling, but still okay. And then a hurricane hit the Stern show. And that hurricane was called Marcy Tuck. Marcy Tuck, if you don't know who she is, and nobody cares who she is, but Marcy Tuck was this guru who she worked on this book, or she worked with this author. Let me see if I can find it. Yeah, the author's name was David Allen, and he was an author who wrote the book Get Things Done, The Art of Stress-Free Productivity. And Marcy Turk, had been working at a Dave's New York office. Stern read the book, was a fan of the book. He wanted to speak to David Allen for advice, and Allen sent Turk Stern's way. This is, and as we always say, this is the beginning of the end. And of course, it's a woman who puts the death nail in the coffin. Marcy Turk completely transformed the Howard Stern show from an edgy guy show or locker room show into this sort of view-like type show. And she snipped the balls from Howard Stern. She refused to allow anyone to get near him. She was called the Howard Whisperer, or the Gatekeeper, because she wouldn't let anybody near him, even his longtime staffers. And he went from being this edgy guy to a very politically correct, soft, just mushy type wuss. And Stern wanted to broaden his appeal and soften his image. And this caused a ruckus amongst fans as they noticed the shift. And they complained online about it. And they rightfully so blamed Turk for cleaning up Stern and making him more palatable to A-list celebrities who he used to mock. Turk took responsibility of leading an outreach to these A-list stars, and she promised them that there would be no uncomfortable questions. She assured them by enticing them that this was a safe space. Oh, God. Anytime that I hear that term, I get the willies. She was in control of the green room, and if you know what a green room is, the green room is where celebrities, when they arrive, they first meet and they speak to. That's where they wait to get interviewed. And she made sure that they were comfortable. Now, I knew somebody who worked at Sirius, not on the Stern floor, but in the Sirius offices, and they used to have funny, goofy pictures of staffers and strippers and all that other stuff. Those pictures of staffers were replaced with show-friendly art and guests receiving guest baskets for appearing. Staffers were no longer allowed to use the green room as a recreation space. That was a huge part of the show back in the day. And she eliminated that. She took the soul away from the show. She just made it was just plastic. It's what the show is today, and that's why it's failed. Stern devoted more of his shows to serious interviews, and Tuck was often accused in these chat rooms, in Stern chat rooms, of steering him towards political correctness. And there was no bigger example at the time of when Stern, who had made enemies with Kathy Lee Gifford and Rosie O'Donnell, had both of them on. He apologized to them and said that he loved them. Even Ellen DeGeneres, which ended up biting him in the ass, because we all know Ellen DeGeneres. We all know about her. But he had these wars with these people, and he totally sucked their toes. He had a 90-minute interview with a girl creator, that stupid show Girls that was on HBO, that I don't know anybody who watched that shit. But Lena Dunham, that monster that everybody tries to make herself out to be cute, he had her on for 90 minutes. 90 minutes. And to be honest, it was a soft, silly little interview. I didn't learn shit from it when I saw the clips of it. She later called him a feminist. Even when he got cleaned up, Lena Dunham, who was a zero, a nobody, still wasn't satisfied with the weak Stern. And those celebrity interviews that would take an hour or two replaced the hijinks that the show was famous for, that made the show spicy and good. Now, a lot of people say that Stern was successful in rebranding his image. But sometimes when you rebrand your image, you destroy the soul of what your show is about. And he just became another mainstream radio guy who interviewed A-listers because he was safe. And the one thing as a man you don't want to be is safe. When women think you're safe, they will leave you. I have to get off that, not to get off topic, but you have to be dangerous. You have to be a monster. And Stern used to be a monster. That's why people loved him. Now he's just a bunny rabbit with a wig. And that's why he went from millions of listeners to 125,000. Now, Stern's move to satellite radio also removed his cultural impact, because not a lot of people didn't. You have way too many options on satellite radio. Metallica has their own station that's going to be launching on August 28th, I think, or August 29th. You don't have to listen to Howard Stern. When I had satellite radio, I still have it, but when I had satellite radio, I listened to other things. I loved listening to some of the Bon Jovi station. I loved listening to Bruce's station, hard rock. Most of the hard rock stations, or the 80s stuff, 90s stuff. I lost track of Stern, and I can't take him seriously anymore, especially after his complete turn from everyday guy to this woke fruitcake who kisses Kamala Harris's ass, who kisses Democrats' ass, who kisses Black Lives Matter ass, who won't leave his house because he's afraid of getting COVID. I mean, what kind of man is that? That's no man at all. So hopefully this is the end of Stern. I mean, it wouldn't matter to me. I don't listen anymore, and I don't think most of you out there listen either. But if it is the end, it just goes to show that you should never overstay your welcome. You should go out on top. He should have went out on top probably in 2010. He could have done this. I think he's on Dancing with the Stars or one of those stupid shows. That's when he really just went off the rails. When nobody listened to him after that, because he was on these stupid shows. America's Got Talent, I think it is. But it's over for Stern. Thank goodness. And that's my 2 cents. Anyway, thank you again for watching. Please like, subscribe, comment, and share. Be careful out there, my friends. Satan is always busy, as we know today, unfortunately. Be a man, have a backbone, because masculinity and common sense are worth standing up for. And remember, if it ends in an ism, it's a mental disorder. We'll see you later.